The pharmacy line moved slow that Thursday afternoon, and I remember the smell of the place, menthol and floor wax, while I waited to pick up my heart medication. When the pharmacist rang me up, $41 and change, I handed over my card the way I'd done every month for 6 years. She tapped it twice, frowned, and tried again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bell, it's saying declined." I told her to run it once more, certain it was a machine error. It wasn't. I tried my second card, the one I kept folded behind my license for emergencies. Declined again. Behind me, a man in scrubs checked his watch, and an older woman I didn't recognize looked away like she was embarrassed for me, which somehow felt worse than if she'd stared. I told the pharmacist I'd be back, left my pills on the counter, and walked out into the parking lot with my ears ringing. I called my daughter from the car before I'd even started the engine. She picked up on the third ring, cheerful, like nothing in the world was wrong. "Hey, Dad. My cards aren't working, Carol. Both of them." There was a pause, just a beat too, long before she answered. "Oh, yeah, Dennis. And I switched some things around on your accounts last week." I asked her what that meant. Switched around. She said it lightly, the way you'd mention rearranging furniture. "We just moved you onto a simpler system. Dad, one account, one card, easier for us to keep an eye on." I asked her since when did she need to keep an eye on my money. Her voice shifted, went careful, rehearsed almost. "Dad, you left the stove on in March. You missed your cardiologist appointment in April. We talked about this, being for the best. I hadn't agreed to anything." I told her that plainly, and she sighed like I was the one being difficult. "We'll talk tonight, okay? Love you." She hung up before I could answer. I sat in that parking lot for a long while, engine off, both hands on the wheel, watching people go in and out of the pharmacy with their bags and their normal Thursdays, while mine had just quietly ended and started over as something else. I've lived in the same stucco ranch house outside Tucson for 31 years. My wife Marion and I bought it the year I made captain, back when I was still flying regional routes out of the old terminal before they built the new one. We raised Carol in that house, watched her ride a bicycle down our cul-de-sac until the training wheels came off, sat up with her through 2 broken engagements before the third one finally stuck. Marion passed 8 years ago from a stroke that took her in 11 days flat. No warning, no goodbye speech like in the movies, just gone. I still keep her reading glasses on the nightstand. I don't know why. I just haven't been able to move them. After I retired from the airline, my days took a shape I liked. Coffee on the back patio, a walk around the wash before it got hot, sometimes 18 holes with old crew guys from the airline who'd also retired out here. Carol lived across town with her husband Dennis, a man who sold insurance and always had an opinion about things that weren't his business, delivered in a tone that made it sound like he was doing you a favor. They had 2 boys, my grandsons, Tyler and Max, and I loved those kids the way you only love people who still think you're the most interesting person in any room. About a year back, Dennis had offered to help me get my finances onto my phone. "Everything's digital now, Frank," he'd said, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open. He set up new logins, changed my passwords, added something called a shared view so Carol could check in on my accounts. He said, just in case. "It'll protect you from those scam calls seniors get," he told me. Carol nodded along. It sounded sensible at the time. He was family. I trusted him the way you trust anyone who says the right words in the right order. My bank branch is run by a woman named Deb Ferris, who's known me since before Marion got sick. The second I walked through those doors that Thursday, she read my face before I said a word. "Frank, what's wrong?" "My cards got declined twice today, Deb, and I have no idea why." She pulled up my account right there at the counter, and I watched her expression change from concern to something sharper. "Frank," she said, "your mailing address was updated 2 weeks ago." I leaned over the screen. It wasn't my address. It was Dennis and Carol's. She kept scrolling. "Your phone number on file was changed too, also theirs. And the email tied to your alerts, also changed." I asked her when all this happened. Over the last several weeks, a little at a time, she said, and something in the way she said it, a little at a time, made my stomach drop before I even understood why. She asked if I'd authorized any of it. I told her no, not one piece. She picked up the phone and called down someone from the fraud department, a young man named Marcus who arrived with a folder and calm, careful questions. Had I lost my wallet? No. Had I given anyone my passwords? My son-in-law helped set up my online banking. Did he know them? He probably does. Marcus and Deb traded a look. Quiet, not alarmed exactly. The look of two people who'd seen a version of this story before. Marcus pulled up something called an account, modification authorization, with an electronic signature on it. He turned the screen toward me. My name was there, written the way I always sign it, except I never signed it. Not that form, not ever. I asked him if a signature like that could be faked or copied from somewhere. He said it was possible, and that they'd need to review everything, every change, going back months, because in his experience, he said, these things almost never happen all at once. They happen slowly, one small step that looks harmless by itself, until you look up one day and the whole floor's been swapped out from under you. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Marion's old reading chair with the television off, staring at a photo of the two of us on the day I got my captain's wings, her laughing at something just out of frame. Marion used to tell me, don't go swinging a hammer before you know what's cracked. She'd been right about most things in her life, and I decided that night I wasn't calling Dennis or Carol until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning I went back to the bank and Marcus laid out a timeline across the table, month by month. 10 months back, my online credentials were reset. Around the same time, a secondary contact was added to my account. Dennis, then Carol 3 weeks later. Fraud alerts were rerouted to Dennis's phone, meaning I hadn't seen a single one in months. A spending cap was quietly placed on my checking account, $300, without a single conversation with me about it. I'd flown wide-body jets across oceans in weather that would turn most, men's hair white, and now someone had decided I needed permission to spend more than the price of a decent dinner. Deb told me gently that no money had actually gone missing, that whatever this was, it looked less like theft and more like something else entirely. Control, she said, not robbery, control. That word sat with me the whole drive home, and pieces started rearranging themselves in my memory, the way they do once you know what you're looking for. Christmas, Carol had insisted on handling my taxes. Dad, it'll save you the headache. Then asked oddly specific questions about my pension and whether I'd updated my beneficiaries. Easter. Dennis had casually mentioned a retirement community out past the golf course. Gorgeous grounds, Frank. You'd never have to mow again. At the time, I'd taken it as kindness. Now I wasn't so sure kindness was the right word for it. By Friday, I was sitting across from an attorney named Ray Osei, who'd handled Marion's and my estate paperwork 15 years earlier, and still ran his office out of a converted house with paper files stacked to the ceiling. He read through everything I brought him without interrupting once. And when he finally looked up, he said the signatures bothered him most. This document references a meeting in my office that never took place, he said. I wasn't part of any of this. He told me not to confront anyone yet. If people believe they've already won, he said, they stop being careful. I asked him what to do in the meantime, and he said one word. Nothing. Just go on the way you've been going. And watch. Before I left, he asked if anyone had mentioned assisted living lately. I froze, then admitted, yes. More than once, always dressed up as concern. Wouldn't it be nice not worrying about the yard? Frank, imagine someone else cooking for you. Ray nodded slowly and told me he'd seen the pattern plenty of times in his career. Financial control, he said, has a way of showing up right before someone tries to prove a person can't manage their own life anymore. I drove home a different way that evening, past that same retirement community Dennis had mentioned, all soft lighting and rocking chairs, and thought about how a brochure Carol had slipped me weeks earlier suddenly made a lot more sense than it had at the time. Ray called me 2 days later, his voice tighter than usual. He'd found something. Dennis, it turned out, had reached out to a real estate agent asking what homes on my street were worth. My house. I hadn't put it up for sale, hadn't even considered it. And yet somebody was already pricing it like a foregone conclusion. Ray told me, calmly as ever, that someone planning ahead doesn't always ask permission first. They just gather information quietly and wait. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. The one Marion and I had bought second-hand the year we moved in, the one Carol had done her algebra homework on, and understood this had stopped being about a declined card at a pharmacy. It was about whether I still got a vote in my own life. Ray called once more before the weekend, more serious than I'd heard him. He believed paperwork was already being prepared, somewhere, questioning whether I still had the capacity to manage my own affairs. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up, watching the shadows move across Marion's old garden out back, understanding for the first time that this wasn't a disagreement between a father and his daughter. It was a race, and if I made one wrong move, I could lose a great deal more than a credit card. Ray connected me with an elder law specialist named Patricia Yoon, recommended by a retired judge who lived 2 doors down and had heard bits of my story secondhand. Patricia was quiet, precise, and asked exactly one important question after I told her everything. Had any doctor ever diagnosed me with any cognitive impairment? Never. When was my last checkup? 2 months earlier. Clean bill of health apart from being told to walk more and cut back on red meat. Patricia told me plainly that from everything she'd heard, I was entirely capable of managing my own affairs, and that the real challenge wasn't convincing myself of that. It was being ready to prove it if anyone ever tried to say otherwise. Over the following weeks, she and Ray built a file with the bank's help. Every password reset, every address change, every card reissued, every alert quietly rerouted, all of it backed by paper. Nothing assumed, nothing exaggerated. Meanwhile, I kept playing my part at home, calling Dennis before small purchases just to watch what he'd say, mentioning a fishing trip to Carol just to hear her ask if that was really safe at my age. Small test after small test, and every single time, the answer pointed toward a smaller life for me and a bigger say for them. My grandson Max, who was 10, asked me once out of nowhere why his mom always asked his dad if I'd remembered my pills. I told him grown-ups worry too much sometimes, and he shrugged and went back to his cartoons. But I noticed. Kids always notice more than we think. Patricia and Ray helped me build a new estate plan from scratch, one based on transparency instead of convenience. If I were ever genuinely unable to manage my own affairs, that determination would require 2 independent physicians, never a family vote. And financial authority would pass only to a licensed, professional fiduciary with no personal stake in the outcome, never straight to a beneficiary. My house went into a trust that couldn't be sold without my direct approval while I was competent, full stop. When everything was signed, I asked Ray to arrange one final dinner. Just family, I told Dennis and Carol, though I quietly invited Ray, Patricia, Deb, and Marcus as well. Nobody's in trouble tonight. I told the table once everyone had sat down. But I think it's time we talked about the last 10 months, honestly. I laid out the same paper trail Ray and Patricia had built. 1 page at a time, the credential reset, the rerouted alerts, the spending cap I'd never approved, the authorization form with a signature that wasn't mine. Dennis insisted at first that he'd only ever tried to help. Carol crossed her arms and said the same. But when Ray asked Dennis directly whether I had ever told him, I wanted my address changed, my alerts redirected, my cards frozen. The answer every time was no. Dennis turned to Carol and admitted he'd assumed she'd cleared all of it with me. Carol went quiet, then finally said she'd mentioned it to me once, in passing, and had let herself believe that counted as asking. Mentioning something isn't the same as asking someone, I told her, and the table went silent in a way that told me everyone finally understood that. Dennis put his head down and said he honestly thought he was protecting me. that every small, forgotten errand or missed appointment had started to look like evidence of something bigger, when really it had only ever been the ordinary forgetfulness of an ordinary man. He apologized without asking me to pretend none of it had happened, and that mattered more to me than any speech could have. The months since haven't magically erased what happened, but they've been different. Dennis calls to ask now instead of deciding first. Carol wrote me an actual letter, not a text, admitting she'd confused efficiency with kindness and protection with control. Something she said she'd absorbed watching her own grandmother's decline handled badly by well-meaning relatives years before. I used part of my time putting together a small fund at our local senior center, free evening classes on online banking and fraud protection, taught by Deb's team and a retired judge who volunteers his time on power of attorney. Basics. Because too many people my age hand over control simply out of embarrassment at not understanding a screen. A year to the day after that Thursday at the pharmacy, I drove back to pick up the same monthly prescription. Same clerk behind the counter, same $41 and some change. I handed over my card, she ran it once, and it went through clean. No hesitation, no second try, no stranger looking away out of pity. Walking to my car, I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Dennis jogging up, having tagged along after our Sunday coffee had become a standing habit again. He reached for his wallet and offered to cover it. I told him no, I've got this. And for once, he didn't argue. Just smiled the way a man smiles when he's finally learned the difference between helping somebody and running their life for them. We walked out together into the parking lot sunshine. Not a father being managed, and not a son-in-law trying to manage him. Just two people who'd figured out, later than either of us would have liked, that love without respect eventually turns into control, but love with respect turns back into family.